So today I am on the Spotify API. What I wish to do is to use the API to generate myself a database. Now, this database is going to be comprised of tracks, and I want each line item to describe each track. And the line item will be described in terms of the track title, the track ID, which I believe we can get from the API. I want also the album to be specified, when the release date was, and I want to know the genre and the artist who released. Now, I want to use Python to create this pipeline, and I want the database to be automatically updated as we go on, because later on I'm going to use the information from the database to create myself some interesting visualizations. So what I'll do here, I'm going to come under the Discover tab, and when we scroll down, we see that there are many use cases of the API. We've got audio features and analysis, playback, recommendations, search, and so on. We are under the search functionality. And under the search functionality, we see that on the left, we have got some different endpoints that we can use as keywords in our API search. Now, to access this API, what we need to do first is create an app underneath the dashboard. And what I'll do is that I'll log in. Next, I will create an app. Now, I had already created an app. I'll just create a new one. I'll give it a title, Analyzing Data _2. Next, I'll give the app a description. It's going to be the same description as the previous app. I'll just tweak it a little bit. All right, so the app will act as a pipeline to build a database that can be used to analyze artists and track popularities. So I'll click I understand and agree with Spotify's developers. Okay. So what we're after here is the client ID and client secret. Now, these are going to be used as input variables that are going to be inserted in our API call. The first API call that we will make is the authentication API call, where we are aiming to get back an authorization token. That authorization token, of course, will act as a virtual logging in onto the platform, and will give us authorization to access the information in the API. If we go under the search tab again, and we come under guides, we see that there's this authorization guide on the left. What we need is the client credentials flow, and if we scroll down, we see that it gives us information on what is the procedure that we need to follow to get the desired access token. So this is going to be an API call where it's going to be a post, and within the API call, we'll need to specify the URL of the API call. We'll need to specify the client ID and client secret, but they want to be transformed to the base 64 string. Again, we'll need to specify the grant type, which will be the client credentials. Now, I'm going to make this same API call on a Jupyter notebook, where I've already imported requests, date, time, and base 64. So what I'll do now, I'll just incorporate the client ID and client secret within the Jupyter notebook. Next, I will join these as a single string, and I'll call that string client credentials. Now, if we go back to the authorization documentation, remember that the string itself, the client creds, must be in the base 64 format. So what I'll do is I will create a new variable where it's going to be the client credentials underscore B64. And I want that to be the same as my client ID and client secret, but in the base64 encoded string. But before we transform our string to the base64 encoded string, we'll need to transform it to become a byte-sized object first. So that's going to be my new variable there. This has now been transformed to become a byte-sized object. If I copy this and demonstrate, what I mean is, if this is played, this is now a byte, is no longer a string, it's a byte, and that's what we'll need to encode. Now, next, what we'll need to do is specify all our parameters that we will insert in the API call. The first parameter is the URL. So I'll copy this and I'll paste it and I'll call it the authorization URL. Next, we're going to specify the authorization data, and that's going to be the same as grant type and client credentials. So what I'll say is authorization data, and within here is going to be grant type colon client credentials. Next, I'm going to specify my authorization headers is going to be the actual information here. It's going to be the client ID and client secret to the base 64 encoded string. Now this will have to be a string, so we'll have to decode this, but we'll need to specify within the headers the authorization part, and also we mustn't forget the basic that we'll need to insert. And all this information will need to be a string, and this is how I'm going to write it. So I'm going to say authorization data, sorry, authorization headers. So we need to specify the authorization part. So I'll copy this. I'll specify the basic, and after that it is going to be the client credentials base 64. And now I'll need to decode to return it back into the string format. So I've specified the URL, I've specified the authorization data and the headers. Next, what we want to do is execute the actual API call. So it's going to be a post, and I'm going to insert these variables within the actual API call. All right, so I'm going to use the requests library. I've specified the authorization URL. The data will be authorization data, and the headers will be authorization headers. The results will be saved as R. If we display what R is, I'll say print r.json. We see that we've received back our much desired access token. Also, it's come back with the variable expires in, so the token will expire in 3,600 seconds. So the authorization phase is complete. We've retrieved back our access token. It is come back with the expiry time, which is about an hour. So now I'll need to create variables which will extract this information. And those variables are access token, which is equal to the response and the access token, and the expires in, which will then be equal to the 3,600 seconds. I'll just create a Boolean variable now, which will use this expires in to tell me if the actual token has expired. And this is where the date time object comes in. I've imported date time there. And now the actual variable will be did expire, and it will check if now is going to be later than the actual expires times, because the expires time is going to be now the now time plus the actual time it takes to expire, which is about an hour now. Now the authorization part is complete. Now we can actually go into the business end of the search and actually make some API calls. All right, so now what I'll do is I'll start using the actual search API, and for that I'll need to specify the artist's name. So the artist name here is Drake. Now, just like in the authorization phase, what we need to do for the API is know exactly, is it a post or is it a get? And in this case, it's a get. And then we'll need to specify our authorization URL. We'll call this the token URL. We need to specify the authorization. Now that I need to specify within this dictionary that this is the authorization. The type of authorization is the bearer, and within this I'll need to insert the access token. I'll need to specify the query, and within this I'll need to specify Q, which stands for query, and it's going to be artist, which is the Drake, and then The type is the artist. So after specifying those three, I'm going to actually do the actual API call. I'll save the JSON file result as artist response. This is equals to requests.get token URL. Specify parameters as equal to query, and specify headers as equal to the authorization dot JSON. Right. So if we run the actual artist response and see the output, we see what we get is a JSON file. So we've inserted Drake into the actual API call. We've used the get response and we've gotten back the results. Now to go through this, we see that it gives us information where if we insert Drake, the first artist that we get back, we get a name here, Drake, with a certain popularity. And then this guy has got this ID. It also gives us the genre. I think if we go down, we see there's another Drake here, the ruler. So the first result is what we are after. So here, the most important parameters that we need is the genre, the artist's name, their popularity, but by far the most important would be the actual ID, because that would be the actual search key word, which would be, you can say, unique to the actual artist. As you can see, there's a new artist here, Drake here, the ruler, who has been outputted, but we're looking for this artist, Drake. So we'll need to output the actual ID to go on in this actual exercise. Now we'll need to extract these four things: the genre, artist ID, artist name, and artist popularity. So let's start with the genre. So genre, if I take artist response and then search what is under artist, and I say output genre. Okay, so it goes into the actual JSON file. Now let's check item. There's this items here. Let's check item. Okay, we get the actual artists outputted from the API call. If I now say, give me the first one, it's going to give me Drake's information. Now we got genres here. So if I specify that I want the genres, it gives me Canadian hip hop, Canadian pop, hip hop, rap, and Toronto rap. So I'll just take the first one. So I'll save that in the actual JSON file. We're going to do the same thing now for artist ID. Let's check artist ID is equal to artist response. And within here, search artists. I'll replace the item. Oh no, I don't replace the items. The items remains the same for Drake. But now instead of the genres, I want the actual ID. That's what we get. Now we're going to just redo the same exercise now for the artist name and the artist popularity. All right, so I've generated the artist name and artist popularity. So all in all, what we need is the Canadian pop, the actual artist ID, Drake, and their popularity. All right, so we're done with the first stage of our search. We've retrieved the genre, artist ID, artist name, and the popularity. Now, the most of the work is done by getting our access token here, and by getting our artist ID. The stage has been set for how we're going to develop this database. Now, the database is going to be each line item is going to be a track, and each track will then need to be associated with a certain artist. Now, to get a track, we don't have track names. The only thing that we can reference, that we know, or that we can start off this train with, is the artist name. So that's what we've done. We're going to use the artist name to get the artist ID. And from the artist ID, we're going to get the album ID. And then from the album ID, we're going to get the tracks which are associated with that album. And from those tracks, that's where we're going to develop our database. Now, I'm going to do the very same API call as I've done in the previous stage, where I'll specify the token URL. I'll specify also the authorization with the access token. I will leave out the query part. I'll just have the request where inside this get function, there's going to be the token URL and the headers. And from that JSON file, we're going to get the next formation for our database. All right, let's copy this line of code into our album search. Let's remove the query. Let's rename the artist to become album. Now let's change the actual URL to specify albums and also to insert the ID there. So I'll remove the search part. I'll insert here that I'm looking to insert the artist ID. And after here, I'm going to insert the actual artist ID variable. And also, I'm going to insert the keyword album. Let's generate a new access token. And let's play this again. Let's check the response of this API call. And now that's what we get. So if we check the result of this, we've inserted the artist ID, which is there. So the name is Drake, and it has given us an album here. So it's going to be a list of albums. It's going to be the ID of the album. So we will need to get that ID. We have here the release date, the total tracks, and the type, which is an album. And then here we've got the name of the album. Honestly, never mind. So just as for here at the top, we're gonna define a few things that we need. So we need the album type. We need the total tracks. We need the release date. We need the album ID. We need the available markets. So the available markers will just be the number of, is going to be the integer representing the number of countries that this album is available in. And after available markets, we'll have the album name. Okay, so we will need to get all these albums in this JSON file. And the difference between this exercise or this API call to the previous one is, for here we will need to get each item within the items under here, because the JSON file has outputted all the albums that Drake has produced and all the albums which are available on the Spotify API, meaning that all these variables then will need to be outputted as a list. So the album type will need to be a list. The total tracks will need to be a list. So if we want to get the first album, we'll need to go on to item number 1 here out of the items in this dictionary. And now since we want to create a list, that item, I'll output it as a list. And from here, I'll print out all these variables. Okay, so the album types, the total tracks, and so on are outputted here. So these are going to be this, honestly, never mind, is going to be the first album in our database. and this is the album ID that we are after. So we'll need to now jump into this JSON file and then create a for loop where we'll have to iterate or loop through these items and then get all these variables that we are after. So if we loop through all the items in the type, total tracks, release date, IDs, and available markets, we can generate a list of all these variables here. And if we reprint them again, we see that now it's now a list. So we've taken this JSON file and we've collapsed it into a list of all the albums that we are after. We see that this guy Drake, he has got about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 albums in the actual Spotify API. And if we check through all their names here, we see Honestly Nevermind, Certified Lover Boy, Dark Lane, Demo Types, Care Package, and so on. So now we're gonna redo the same steps here. We've got the album IDs here, which we can now use them to generate the same list, but now for the tracks which are associated with these album names. Let us copy and paste our usual line of code, the API call. And now we need to update our URL here. I'm going to change this artist to albums. And now the artist ID now changes to become the album ID. But now I'll just check for the first album ID number 0. And now I'm searching not for the albums, but I'm searching for the tracks. We've got an access token there, and that should be all right. Let's just change this album response now to the track response. Let's run that, and then let's check what track response looks like. Okay, so these are all the tracks for the album ID, the first one, the Honestly Nevermind. So it's going to be the same exercise as for the exercise that we did up here. We're going to generate a list of these tracks. So what I've done is I've iterated through, I've specified that I'm looking for track title, duration in milliseconds, track ID, and I want those to be in a list form. So I have looped through the items in the items, in the items keyword here in the dictionary, and it's given me all the information here. So if we output the actual information by printing out the variables, this is what we get. We see here that the track title, we see intro, falling in love, falling back, text, go green, currents, and so on and so on. We've got the duration here in milliseconds, and then the last list here is going to be the track ID. So this is giving us information only for the first album here. So we'll need to loop in this actual API. We want the tracks for each album here. Now after here, the last API call that we're going to perform will be the tracks themselves have got a certain level of popularity. We see here that if we check the artist name, he's got a popularity which is associated with him. So now the tracks, if we take this artist or this track ID and insert it, what information will it give us? So we see that we get back an actual popularity of the track. Let's take our usual API call here, and I'll change the albums now to tracks, and within here I'm looking now for the track ID. And now let's change now the track response, I'll just call this the track deep search. All right, let's run this, see what track deep search looks like. Okay, so we've inserted the track ID into the API call. Let's see what information we can get here. It's not the longest JSON file, but now we see that we get the name of the actual track. I don't know, this is going to be the album name. We've got the release date, and somewhere within the actual JSON file, we get this popularity here. So the track's popularity is 69. So we'll need to output that. Now to output that, I'll just say popularity is equal to track deep search. So it's going to be track deep search popularity. And then if I print this popularity, we have successfully outputted the integer here, 69. So this is just the background processes that we're going to follow. What we'll need to do now is to build a set of functions, or we can build a class where within this class we're going to insert the let's say the artist name, and then also insert the access token. So we will create a class where we're going to insert the artist name and also the approved, or the let's say the active access token, and then the class will output all these variables for us, and slowly we will build that data frame. Now these variables are in list form, so they'll need to be further transformed into becoming a data frame. But that will be done as we get there. So now we're just going to transform all these things into a function, and then put all of those functions into a class. And that class is now on a new notebook. Now this notebook is the same work that we've been through now, but we've summarized it into a function and a class. The function will work as it will be the authentication phase, where the output is the access token and the time that it will expire. And the class will be the same work that we've been through, where now the actual attributes will be the information that we're looking for, the attributes of the class, which will be the genre, artist ID, artist name, their popularity, going all the way down to all the tracks that they have produced, to each track popularity. Now each exercise that we've been through here has now been summarized into these 8 functions within this class. And each function, for example here, the first function is going to be the search function. It's going to output the JSON file. The next function will take the JSON file and will rearrange the information. The next function will be the album search, where we're gonna need to search the JSON file from the API. And the next function will rearrange the information, and so on. Now the actual output of this class will then be taken as a list. The attributes of each of these classes is going to be a list, and that list will need to be rearranged to be a data frame. Now the major difference between this exercise to the previous one is, in the previous one we are searching for one artist. We specified that we are looking for information pertaining to Drake. Now in this case we've specified the list of artists that we are after, starting with, of course, Drake, Young Thug, and Delay. So these are the top 100 artists at the time of this search. And we're going to loop through all these artists using this class, output their information, and then use that information in a data frame. Now the data frame has been produced here, This is what we've been after. And from here, our exercise has been complete. We see now that the actual data frame has got about 14 columns and 16,981 rows. And if we go through again our features, we've got track title, track duration, we've got the artist, the genre of the artist popularity. We've got the release date, the total tracks, the available markets, the track popularity. Now, the next phase of this exercise, of course, we'll need to go deeper and just check if there's any valuable information we can analyze from here. And again, this data frame will need to be saved into a PostgreSQL database. Now we're going to use PsychoPG2 library to connect to a PostgreSQL database. If I open pgadmin and I select stuff from tracks, this exercise has already been complete. Now, the first thing that we need to do is, of course, create the database here. Connect to the database. So this is on the local host. So this is on the local host. We're going to call the database by a name. We're going to connect to the database. We'll create a similar table on the database as we have on the data frame. We're going to create a data frame on here, which is going to consist of all the items which are not available on the database, and we'll reference the actual track ID. So whatever track ID is not on the database, that track ID we're going to use that row. We're going to create a new temporary data frame. This function will output that data frame, and within the next functions, we're going to append that data frame onto our database. Now, the next step from here, of course, we'll then need to check if our information has got any value. And the way to do that is we're going to be analyzing and plotting some visualizations. Now, that's what we're going to do in the next exercise. We're just going to check within our numeric columns, is there any information that we can get? Is there any information that we can squeeze out of this cow? And we will check if there are any trends and features, and we'll check if maybe there are any relationships that we'll need to keep in mind. Now, the exercise has been complete. This will be available in the next video, but from here, this exercise has been complete. So now I'll go back to my original notebook. So we're going to restart this process and we're going to develop a new database. So what I'll do is I'll create a new database here. So I'll say right click, create database. I'll call this Spotify tracks _2. Save. And let's delete now. Okay, let's create a new query tool here. Okay, so this database is now empty. If you come under tables, we'll find that there's nothing. Okay. So we come back here. So here, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to clear all outputs. And then we're going to import our libraries, run the authentication function, and then we're going to get our new access token. We're going to define our artist lists. We're going to get our class initialized. And we're going to get our variables defined as lists there. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to loop through only the first artist here. So that artist is Drake. So I'll say it's from 0 to 1. So for artists and artists from 0 to 1, let's first check what artist 0 to 1 is equal to. It should be Drake. Yeah, it's Drake. So we're gonna loop through Drake, and then we're gonna get the same information and see the actual database that we've created using our class. Now let's run this and see the results. Okay, and just to clarify, let's check what, for example, a variable A looks like. So it's going to be a list of all the information on that row. So it's going to be a list of all the track titles as A has been defined as the track title. So it's going to be all the track titles in our database. So we're going to take all those lists and I'm going to create a data frame here. And if we run this to see how our data frame looks like, we see here we've got the honestly never mind, and the track title is called intro. The database has got about 187 tracks. So Drake seems like for the entire API has got about 187 tracks. Now let's update this onto the database. We're going to import psychopg and pandas. Now our actual database name is underscore two, Spotify tracks underscore two. So we're going to come here and edit this. It's going to be underscore two. All right. And let's run all our functions. We're going to run the create table function, and then we're going to execute. We're going to run the next functions here where we are checking if the IDs are on the database, and we're going to execute. Next, we're going to append that newly created data frame onto the actual database. And if we come onto the database, we refresh. We check under there, we've got a new table, tracks. And let's select everything from tracks. What we get is the database for Drake.